Let's add functionality to our register form so our user can fill it out and register for our app. We'll begin with the handle change function, which we attach to every input via the onChange handler. We're going to pass through the event object, and using the data on this object, whenever there's a change event, we're going to set the state. And we want to set properties within state that correspond to these name attributes that we set for each of the inputs. So to get the name of a given input that a user is typing in, we'll do it with event.target.name, and the value that the user has typed into a given input we'll access with event.target.value. And within state, we want properties that correspond to each of the values that we set to the name property. So it'll be username, email, password, and password confirmation. We'll set those all to an empty string, and back in our app, we can right-click and hit Inspect to open our console. You can alternatively hit Option, Command, and J or I. We'll hit the arrow up at the top and go to our React DevTools. We'll then search for our register component. Now we can see the state object with all the properties that we put in there. If we type into each one of these inputs, we should see the corresponding property in state updated. Now we want to make it so a user can hit submit when they filled out all the fields and actually register themselves. We'll first touch on an optional step that we can perform. We can destructure all of the values from the state object and pass them down to our individual inputs. We'll grab the username, email, password, and password confirmation from state using object destructuring, and we'll pass each of those to their respective input via the value prop. The purpose of doing this, of passing the value of a given input back to its input component, is that when we set the state, for example, if we set the state of each one of these properties to say an empty string, we can clear any of the values that a user has typed in to their form. So it allows us to clear our form. And on the form component, we're going to add an onSubmit handler, and we're going to connect it to the handle submit function that we're going to create right underneath handle change. It'll also take the event, and we're going to call a method on the event that we're getting called prevent default to prevent the default action of sending a form, which is to reload the page. And now we want to import Firebase from our Firebase file. It includes all of our configuration and the imported packages, the subdependencies. And in particular, we're going to want to grab and use the Firebase/auth dependency. So we're going to get Firebase from 2 levels up. So now we can use it within handle submit. We're going to first call the auth method to make use of all the authorization tools, and then we're going to call create user with email and password. And to this, all we need to do to register a user is to pass in the value that a user supplied for the email input and the password input from state, this.state.email and this.state.password. And since this is a promise, we can, within a then statement, we can get back the user that's created by Firebase. And for now, we'll just log that as created user. And after the then, we'll catch any errors with this catch statement. We'll pass through any errors to a simple console.error. So we'll save that, head to our console from our dev tools, and we'll sign up or register with a user, provide a username, email, password, and password confirmation. And when we hit submit, we see in the console that we're getting an error. We're getting a 400 error, and in particular we're getting a message that tells us that the given sign-in provider is disabled and that we need to enable it within the Firebase console. So we're trying to sign in using the sign-in provider. To enable it, we need to go to the Authentication tab within our Firebase console and click on this button, Set Up Sign-In Method. And up here, next to the email and password provider, we click on the pencil icon, and we'll hit enable for this to enable signups with email and password. Now we can see the status for it is enabled. We can head back to our app and try submitting this form one more time to register our first user. And it looks like it's successful. We get an object back with a number of properties, additional user info, credential, operation type. All of the user info that we provided will be within this user property. It includes a bunch of other stuff as well. So it includes the email that we provided to it, as well as stuff like phone number, photo URL, refresh token, a number of things. We'll be making use of a number of these properties in later sections and updating them for a given user. And if we take a look at back in Firebase in our admin panel, the users tab, we can see we have our first user here in this user table with the identifier, the provider, when it was created, when the user signed in, and their user ID.